Marouf the Cobbler. Once upon a time, in the city of Cairo, lived a cobbler named Maruf and his wife Fatima. This hag treated him so badly, repaying every good action with a bad one, that Maruf began to look upon her as the embodiment of the inexplicable contrariness of the world. Bowed down with a sense of real injustice, driven to the last extremity of despair, he fled to a ruined monastery near the city, where he plunged himself in prayer and supplication, calling out incessantly, "Lord, I beg of thee to send me a means of release, so that I may travel an immense distance from this place, to find safety and hope." This he continued to do for several hours, when an amazing thing happened. A being of great height and strange appearance seemed to pass straight through the wall in front of him, after the manner attributed to the powers of the Abdal, the changed ones, who are human beings who have attained powers far beyond those of ordinary men. "I am the Abdel Makan, the servant of this place," said the apparition. "What do you ask from me?" Maruf told him all his problems. The changed one had Maruf mount his back, and they flew through the air for several hours at an unparalleled speed. Maruf found himself, as daylight dawned, in a far city on the borders of China, a rich and beautiful place. One of the citizens stopped him in the street and asked him who he was. When Maruf told him and tried to explain the manner of his coming, a crowd of jeering louts collected, throwing sticks and stones. They accused him of being mad or else an impostor of some kind. The mob was still handling the unfortunate cobbler roughly when a merchant rode up and dispersed them, saying, "Have shame! A stranger is a guest, bound to us by the sacred bonds of hospitality and worthy of our protection." His name was Ali. Ali explained to his friend how he had progressed from rags to riches in this strange city of Ikhtiar. The merchants there, it seemed, were generally more inclined than other folk to take a man at his word. If he was poor, they would not give him much of a chance in life, because they considered that man was poor because he had to be so. If, on the other hand, a man was said to be rich, they would give him consideration, credit, and honor. Ali had discovered this fact. He had therefore gone to several rich merchants of the town and asked them for loans, saying that a caravan of his had not yet arrived. The loans were made, Ali multiplied the money by trading in the great bazaars, and he had been able to return the original capital and actually made himself rich. He advised Maruf to do the same. Thus it was that Maruf, dressed by his friend in a sumptuous robe, went and borrowed from one merchant after another. The only difference was that, because of his charitable disposition, Maruf gave the money away to beggars. His caravan, after months of waiting, showed no signs of arriving, and Maruf was doing no business, but his charity increased, for people vied with each other to give money on loan to a man who immediately spent it on charity. In this way, they thought, they would both get their loans back when the caravan arrived, and also participate, at one remove, in the blessing inseparable from acts of benevolence. As time passed, however, the merchants began to wonder whether Maruf was, after all, an impostor. They went to the king of the city to complain. The king called Maruf before him. The king was in two minds about Maruf, and resolved to test him. He had a valuable jewel, which he decided to present to the merchant Maruf, to see whether he realized its value or not. If he did, the king, who was a greedy man, would give his daughter in marriage to Maruf. If he did not, he would be thrown in jail. Maruf presented himself at court, and the jewel was placed in his hands. "This is for you, good Maruf," said the king. "But tell me, why do you not pay your debts?" "Because, your majesty, my caravan of priceless things has still not arrived. As for this jewel, I think it better for your majesty to keep it, for it is worthless compared to the really valuable jewels which I have in my caravan." Overcome by greed, the king dismissed Maruf and sent a message to the representative of the merchants to hold their peace. He resolved to marry the princess to the merchant, in spite of the Grand Wazir's opposition. The Wazir said that Maruf was a manifest liar. The king, however, remembered that the Wazir had been asking for the princess's hand for years, and attributed his advice to prejudice. Maruf, when he was told that the king would bestow his daughter upon him, merely said to the Wazir, "Tell His Majesty that until my caravan arrives, loaded with priceless jewels and the like, I cannot make due provision for a princess wife, and hence I suggest the marriage be postponed." Told of this attitude, the king immediately opened his treasury to Maruf, so that he could choose whatever he needed for the setting up of a suitable way of life, and for gifts consonant with the rank of a royal son-in-law. Never was such a marriage seen in that or any other country. Not only were alms distributed by the handful of jewels, but everyone who even heard of the wedding was given a lavish present. The celebrations lasted for 40 days in unprecedented magnificence. When they were at last alone, Maruf said to his bride, "I have already taken so much from your father that I am troubled," because he had to account for his being somewhat sore at heart. "Think nothing of it," said the princess, "for when your caravan arrives, all will be well." Meanwhile, the Wazir renewed his agitation with the king to investigate Maruf's real position. They decided to seek the princess's help, and she agreed to find out, at an opportune moment, the real truth of the matter. As they lay in one another's arms, the princess that night asked her husband to explain the mystery of the missing caravan. Maruf had just that very day told his friend Ali that he did indeed have a caravan of priceless worth, but now he decided to speak the truth. "There is no caravan," he said, "and although the Wazir is right, his words are due to his greed. Your father, too, gave you to me because of his own greed. Why did you yourself consent to marry me?" "You are my husband," replied the princess, "and I will never disgrace you. Take these 50,000 gold pieces, flee the country, send me a message from safety, where I will join you in due course. Meanwhile, leave me to attend to the court situation." Dressed as a slave, Maruf fled in the dead of night. Now when the king and the Wazir called the Princess Dunya to them for her report, she said, "Respected father and most worthy Wazir, I was about to broach the question with my husband Maruf last night, when a strange thing happened." "What was that?" they exclaimed together. 10 Mamelukes, dressed most magnificently, arrived beneath the palace window, carrying a letter from the chief of Maruf's caravan. The letter said that they had been delayed because of an attack by numerous Bedouins. 50 of the guards out of 500 were killed, and a quantity of the merchandise, 200 camel loads, was carried off. "And what did Maruf say?" "He said very little. 200 loads and 50 lives were nothing, he thought. But he at once rode off to meet the caravan and bring it back to us." Thus the princess bought time. As for Maruf, he rode hard, not knowing where, until he came to a peasant ploughing a small strip of land. To him he gave greeting, and the peasant said, out of the goodness of his heart, "Be a guest of mine, great slave of the king's majesty. I will bring you some food to share with me." He hurried off, and Maruf, touched by his kindness, decided to continue with the man's ploughing as a contribution to his welfare. He had not made many furrows when the plough struck a stone. When he pulled it away, a flight of steps leading into the ground was revealed. Below was a huge chamber, filled with innumerable treasures. In a crystal box was a ring, which Maruf picked out and rubbed, Instantly a strange apparition materialized, crying, "Here am I, thy servant, my lord." Marouf discovered that this jinn was known as Father of Happiness, and that he was one of the most powerful commanders of the jinn, and that the treasure had belonged to the ancient king Shaddad, son of Ad. The Father of Happiness was now the slave of Marouf. The cobbler ordered the treasure to be taken to the surface of the ground. Then it was loaded on camels and mules and horses materialized by the jinn. Every kind of precious material was also produced by the other jinns who served the Father of Happiness, and the caravan was soon ready to depart. The peasant returned with a little barley and pulse. Now that he saw Marouf and his treasures, he imagined that this must be a king. Marouf gave him some gold and told him to claim a greater reward later. Accepting the peasant's hospitality, he ate only pulse and barley. Marouf sent the jinns, for such were the men and animals in disguise, ahead to the city of his father-in-law. When they arrived, the king attacked the wazir for his having ever suggested that Marouf was a pauper. When the princess heard that a resplendent caravan had arrived, belonging to Marouf, she did not know what the truth was. She suspected that Marouf had said that he had lied in order to test her loyalty. Marouf's friend Ali, for his part, assumed that this great caravan was the work of the princess, who must surely in some way have contrived to save her husband's name and life. All the merchants who had lent money to Marouf and had wondered at his generosity with it were now even more amazed at the amount of gold, jewels and gifts which he was distributing to the poor and needy. But the wazir was still suspicious. No merchant was ever known to act in this way, he told the king, and he proposed a plot. He lured Marouf into a garden, plied him with music and wine, and in his drunkenness Marouf confessed the truth. The wazir then borrowed the magical ring from the unresisting Marouf, made the jinn appear, and ordered him to spirit Marouf away into the farthest desert. Reviling him for revealing the precious secret, the jinn willingly snatched up Marouf and threw him down in the Hadramaut wilderness. Now the wazir commanded the jinn to take his master, the king, and hurl him down together with Marouf. The wazir seized power and even tried to seduce the princess. The princess, however, when the wazir came to her, got possession of the ring from his finger, rubbed it, and had the jinn take the minister away in chains. In 1 hour the jinn had brought back the king and Marouf to the palace. The wazir was put to death for his treachery, and Marouf became the prime minister in his stead. They lived happily together thereafter. The king died, and Marouf succeeded him. He now had a son. The princess retained possession of the ring. Now she became ill, and handing over the care of the child and the ring to Marouf, she died, warning him to take equal care of each. Not long afterwards, King Marouf was lying in bed when he awoke with a start. Beside him was none other than his first wife, the hideous Fatima, transported there by magical means. She explained what had befallen her. When Marouf disappeared, she repented and became a beggar. Life was hard, and she was reduced to the utmost extremity of suffering. One day, while she was lying down trying to sleep, she cried out in her distress, when a jinn appeared and told her about the adventures of Marouf since they had last met. She asked him to take her to Ikhtiar, and she had been brought there with the speed of light. She was now most contrite, and Marouf agreed to take her back as his wife, warning her that he was now a king and master of a magical ring, whose servitor was the great jinn, Father of Happiness. Humbly she thanked him, and took her place as the queen, but she hated the little prince. Now, at night, Maruf used to take off his magical ring. Fatima knew this, and before long crept into his bedroom and stole it. The little boy, however, had followed her, and when he saw her steal the ring, he drew his tiny sword and killed the hag, fearful of the exercise of her new power. Thus did the false Fatima find her grave at the place of her greatest honour. Now Maruf called the honest peasant who had been the instrument of his salvation, and made him prime minister. He married the peasant's daughter, and thereafter all lived in happiness and success. Like various other dervish tales, this one appears in the Arabian Nights. Unlike most Sufi allegories, it is not found in poetic form. Again, unlike most except for the Mullah Nasruddin cycle, it is sometimes performed in chaikhanas, tea-houses, as a drama. It has no moral, as people in the West are accustomed to them, but it stresses certain cause and effect relationships which are a marked feature of some Sufi literature. Wisdom for sale. A man named Saiful Muluk spent half of his life in seeking truth. He read all the books on ancient wisdom which he could find. He travelled to every known and unknown country to hear what spiritual teachers had to say. He spent the days working and the nights in contemplation of the great mysteries. One day he heard of yet another teacher, the great poet Ansari, who lived in the city of Herat. Bending his steps thither, he arrived at the door of the sage. On it he saw written, contrary to his expectation, a strange announcement. Knowledge is sold here. This must be a mistake, or else a deliberate attempt to dissuade the idle curiosity seeker, he said to himself. For I have never before heard it said that knowledge can be bought or sold. So he went into the house. Sitting in the inner courtyard was Ansari himself, bent with age and writing a poem. "Have you come to buy knowledge?" he asked. Saiful Muluk nodded. Ansari told him to produce as much money as he had. Saiful Muluk took out all his money, amounting to 100 pieces of silver. "For this much," said Ansari, "you can have 3 pieces of advice." "Do you really mean that?" asked Saiful Muluk. "Why do you need money if you are a humble and dedicated man?" "We live in the world, surrounded by its material facts," said the sage, "and with the knowledge that I have, I gain great new responsibilities. Because I know certain things that others do not, I have to spend money, among other things, to be of service where a kind word or the exercise of barakah is not indicated." He took the silver and said, "Listen well. The first piece of advice is, a small cloud signals danger." "But is this knowledge?" asked Saiful Muluk. "It does not seem to tell me much about the nature of ultimate truth, or about man's place in the world." "If you are going to interrupt me," said the sage, "you can take your money back and go away. What is the use of knowledge about man's place in the world if that man is dead?" Saiful Muluk was silenced, and he waited for the next piece of advice. The second piece of advice is, if you can find a bird, a cat, and a dog in one place, get hold of them and look after them until the end. This is curious advice, thought Saiful Muluk, but perhaps it has an inner metaphysical meaning which will become manifest to me if I meditate upon it long enough. So he held his peace until the sage brought forth the last piece of advice. When you have experienced certain things which seem irrelevant, keeping faith with the foregoing advice, Then and only then will a door open for you. Enter that door. Saif-ul-Muluk wanted to stay to study under this baffling sage, but Ansari sent him away rather roughly. He continued his wanderings and went to Kashmir to study under a teacher there. When he was travelling through Central Asia again, he reached the marketplace of Bukhara during an auction sale. A man was leading away a cat, a bird, and a dog which he had just bought. If I had not tarried so long in Kashmir, thought Saif-ul-Muluk, I would have been able to buy these animals, because they certainly are a part of my destiny. Then he started to worry, because although he had seen the bird, the cat, and the dog, he had not yet seen the small cloud. Everything seemed to be going wrong. The only thing that saved him was looking through one of his notebooks in which he had recorded, though not remembered, the advice of an ancient sage. Things happen in succession. Man imagines this succession to be of a certain kind, but it sometimes is another kind of succession. Then he realized that, although the 3 animals had been bought at an auction, Ansari had not actually told him to buy them at an auction. He had not remembered the words of the advice, which had been, "If you can find a bird, a cat, and a dog in one place, get hold of them, and look after them until the end." So he started to trace the buyer of the animals, to see whether they were still in one place. After many inquiries, he found out that the man was called Ashiki-Kuda, and that he had only bought the animals to save them the pain of being cooped up in the auctioneer's rooms, where they had been for several weeks awaiting a buyer. They were still in one place, and Ashiki-Kuda was glad to sell them to Saif-ul-Muluk. He settled in Bukhara, because it was not practicable to continue journeying with the animals. Every day he went out to work in a wool-spinning factory, returning in the evening with food for the animals, which he had bought from his day's earnings. Time passed, 3 years. One day, when he had become a master spinner and was living as a respected member of the community with his animals, he walked to the outskirts of the town and saw what seemed to be a tiny cloud, hovering almost on the horizon. It was such a strange-looking cloud that his memory was jogged, and the first piece of advice came into his consciousness, very sharply. A small cloud signals danger. Saif-ul-Muluk returned immediately to his house, collected his animals, and started to flee westwards. He arrived in Isfahan almost penniless. Some days later, he learned that the cloud which he had seen was the dust of a conquering horde, which had captured Bukhara and slain all its inhabitants. And the words of Ansari came into his mind. What is the use of knowledge about man's place in the world, if that man is dead? The people of Isfahan were not enamoured of animals, wool spinners, nor strangers, and Saif-ul-Muluk was, before long, reduced to extreme poverty. He threw himself down on the ground and cried, "O succession of saints, O holy ones, ye who have been changed, come you to my aid, for I am reduced to a state in which my own efforts no longer yield sustenance, and my animals are suffering hunger and thirst." As he lay there, between sleeping and waking, his stomach gnawed by hunger, and having resigned himself to the guidance of his fate, he saw a vision of something as clearly as if it were there. It was a picture of a golden ring, set with a changing lighted stone, which flashed fire, glowed like the phosphorescent sea, and in its depths gave off green lights. A voice, or so it seemed to be, said, "This is the golden crown of the ages, the Samir of truth, the very ring of King Solomon the son of David, upon whose name be peace, whose secrets are to be preserved." Looking around him, he saw that the ring was rolling into a crevice in the ground. It seemed as though he was beside a stream, under a tree, near a curiously shaped boulder. In the morning, rested and more able to bear his hunger, Saif-ul-Muluk started to wander around the periphery of Isfahan. Then, as he had half expected for some reason, he saw the stream, the tree, and the rock. Under the rock there was a crevice. In the crevice, into which he interposed a stick, was the ring which he had already seen in the curious way related above. Washing the ring in the water, Saif-ul-Muluk exclaimed, "If this is truly the ring of the great Solomon, upon whom be the salute, grant me, spirit of the ring, a worthy end to my difficulties." Suddenly it was as if the earth shook, and as if a voice like a whirlwind was echoing in his ears. "Across the centuries, good Saif-ul-Muluk, we bid you peace. You are the inheritor of the power of Solomon the son of David, upon whom be peace, master of the jinns and men. I am the slave of the ring. Command me, Master Saif-ul-Muluk, master." "Bring the animals here, and food for them," said Saif-ul-Muluk at once, not forgetting to add, "In the great name and in the name of Solomon, our master, commander of the jinns and men, upon him be the salute." Almost before he had finished saying this, there were the animals, and each had set before him the necessary food, that which he liked best. Then he rubbed the ring, and the spirit of the ring again answered him, like a rushing in the ears. "Command me, and whatever you desire shall be done, save only that which is not to be done, master of the ring." "Tell me, in the name of Solomon, peace upon him, is this the end? For I must look after the welfare of these companions of mine until the end, according to the command of my own master, the Khoja Ansar of Herat." "No," replied the spirit, "it is not the end." Saif-ul-Muluk stayed at this spot, where he had the jinn build him a small house and a place for the animals, and he passed his days with them. Every day the jinn brought them all sufficient for their needs, and passers-by marvelled at the sanctity of Saif Baba, Father Saif as he was called, who lived on nothing, surrounded by tame and wild animals. When he was not studying the notes of his travels and contemplating his experiences, Saif Baba observed the three animals and learnt their ways. Each responded to him in its own way. He encouraged their good qualities and discouraged their bad ones, and he often spoke to them about the great Khoja Ansar and the 3 pieces of advice. From time to time, holy men passed by his habitation, and often they invited him to dispute with them or to learn their own particular ways. But he refused, saying, "I have my task to perform, given me by my teacher." Then one day he was surprised to find that the cat was speaking to him in a language which he understood. "Master," said the cat, "you have your task, and you must carry it out. But are you not surprised that the time which you call the end has not come?" "I am not really surprised," said Saif Baba, "because for all I know it might last for 100 years. "That is where you are wrong," said the bird, which was now talking too. "For you have not learned what you could have learned from the various travellers who have passed this way. You do not realize that although they appear different, as we animals all appear different to you, they were all sent by the source of your teaching, by Khoja Ansar himself, to see whether you had acquired enough insight to follow them." "If this is true," said Saif Baba, "which I do not for a moment believe, can you explain to me why it is that a mere cat and a tiny sparrow can tell me things which I, with the miraculous benefits which I have received, cannot see?" "That is simple," they both said together. "It is that you have become so accustomed to looking at things in only one way that your shortcomings are visible even to the most ordinary mind." This worried Saif Baba. "So I could have found the door of the third piece of advice long ago, if I had been properly attuned to it?" he asked. "Yes," said the dog, joining the discussion. "The door has opened a dozen times in the past years, but you did not see it. We did, but because we are animals, we could not tell you." "Then how can you tell me now?" "You can understand our speech because you yourself have lately become more human. But you have only one more chance, for age is overcoming you." Saif Baba at first thought, "This is a hallucination." Then he thought, "They have no right to talk to me like this. I am their master and the source of their sustenance." Then another part of him thought, "If they are wrong, it does not matter. But if they are right, this is terrible for me. I cannot take a chance." So he awaited his opportunity. Months passed. One day a wandering dervish came along and pitched a tent on Saif Baba's doorstep. He made friends with the animals, and Saif decided to take him into his confidence. "Away with you," snapped the dervish. "I am not interested in your tales of the Master Ansari, your clouds and your seeking and your responsibility to animals, even your magic ring. Leave me in peace. I know what you should be talking about, but I do not know what you are talking about." Saif Baba in desperation called the spirit of the ring, but the jinn merely said, "I am not to tell you those things which are not to be told, but I do know that you are suffering from the disease called permanent hidden prejudice, which rules your thoughts and makes it difficult for you to progress in the way." Then Saif Baba went to the dervish who was sitting on his doorstep and said, "What should I do? For I feel a responsibility for my animals and a confusion about myself, and there is no more guidance in my 3 pieces of advice." "You have talked sincerely," said the dervish, "and this is a beginning. Hand your animals over to me, and I will tell you the answer." "But I do not know you, and you ask too much," said Saif Baba. "How can you ask such a thing? I respect you, but there is still a doubt in my mind." "Well spoken," said the dervish. "You have revealed not your concern for your animals, but your own lack of perception about me. If you judge me by emotion or logic, you cannot benefit from me. You still are covetous in some way, maintaining proprietorship over your animals. Go away, as sure as my name is Darwaza." Now, Darwaza means door, and Saif Baba thought very hard about this. Could this be the door which was foretold by his Sheikh Ansari? "You may be the door I am seeking, but I am not sure," he said to the dervish Darwaza. "Be off with you, you and your speculations," shouted the dervish. "Don't you see that the first 2 pieces of advice were for your mind, and that the last piece can be understood only when you perceive it yourself?" After nearly 2 more years of confusion and anxiety, Saif Baba suddenly realized the truth. He called his animals and dismissed them, saying, "You are on your own now. This is the end." As he said so, he realized that the animals now had human forms, and that they were transformed. Standing beside him was Darwaza, but his form was now that of the great Khoja Ansar himself. Without saying a word, Ansari opened a door in the tree beside the stream, and as he walked over the threshold, Saif Baba saw written up in letters of gold in a wondrous cavern the answers to the questions about life and death, about mortality and humanity, about knowledge and ignorance, which had plagued him all his life. "Attachment to externals," said the voice of Ansari, "has been what has held you back all these years. In some ways, because of this, you are too late. Take here the only part of wisdom still open to you." This story illustrates, among other things, the favorite Sufi theme that truth is trying to manifest itself among humanity, but that it appears again and again for each man in guises which are difficult of penetration, and at first sight may have no connection with each other. Only the development of a special perception enables man to keep abreast of this unseen process.